They talk to me about what it elicited, like what you said about, they would tell me about what it made them think about. They're telling me about some of their own experiences. They're asking me questions about my strategies. They're asking me questions about my models. Not one person is asking me questions about my background and all the gory detail. Nobody's asking me about my children and where they're at now. And that means it's no longer exhausting for me. And this is the difference that you notice when you shift from your stories not being all about you and the way you want to tell them, but actually being all about the audience. Because it's still using the same material. We just shape it slightly differently so it lands for the audience. So the audience get the ability to lean in and put themselves inside of your story. So episode 21 may seem like I'm actually repeating myself a little from episode 20. And I'm really happy to wear that because I want it to really come home that your stories are not about you, even when they are. Now, this is one of the hardest things for people to wrap their head around when we start to work together, especially those whose speeches or whose stories are predominantly lived experience, personal lived experience, as opposed to worked experience. And it's really important that you do understand this because it doesn't matter how much your lived experience creates. It could be that your lived experience is 80% of the story, that is 80% of the speech. But your lived experience and your worked experience actually has to show up in a way that people can put themselves in beside it. Now, there's a couple of things that are really important with this. And one is the only way to punch through from red zone to gold zone is actually to understand that the truth in this statement that your stories are not about you. And if I think about somebody I worked with out of Melbourne a couple of years ago, what was really interesting was she was getting paid to speak. She was getting paid an average of only about $3,000 to speak, and she couldn't quite punch through. And one of the things that was coming up for her as well was that she just felt exhausted every time she spoke, and she was really questioning whether it was for her. She'd been running at it for 6 or 7 years, so it wasn't like she hadn't given it a red hot crack. But one of the things that was really interesting was that it is a very big lived experience story. And her feedback was very much in red zone. And even though she was getting paid consistently, which would make you think it was gold zone, she couldn't punch through what we call the starting barrier. So $1,500 to $3,000 a gig is really the start of your speaking career. And if you can't punch through that and you want to, then it becomes an issue. So what was happening for her though is because her lived experience was being told from her perspective, the way that she wanted to tell it, it was landing beautifully, but people were saying, "Oh, I like you," which we spoke about in episode 20. They were saying, "Wow, your story is amazing. Wow, you're so courageous. Wow, you're brave. I cannot believe you made it through." But also in the questions that would come after she finished speaking would be all about, so where are your children? What are they doing? What's happening? And it was like they would share, her actual words were, it's like they're clawing to get every last possible detail of my life. Now, when we took that big lived experience story and we shaped it in service of the audience, in service of the Blue Apple, it completely changed. She broke through really quickly to gold zone, to true gold zone, where it was all about she was getting paid $7,000 to $8,000 a gig, and some were bumping up to 10. And it happened rapidly. It happened in less than 6 months. The other thing that happened, and this is a bit that has always stuck with me, is I remember on one of our coaching calls, she actually said to me, she said, "Jack," she said, "you wouldn't believe though what the real difference is. Like, I delivered that big gig to that XYZ organization just recently." And she said, "The difference is I wasn't exhausted, and this is why." She said, "Now when I talk, they do come up and ask me questions, but they ask me questions about strategy. They talk to me about what it elicited, like what you said about, they would tell me about what it made them think about. They're telling me about some of their own experiences. They're asking me questions about my strategies. They're asking me questions about my models." Not one person is asking me questions about my background and all the gory detail. Nobody's asking me about my children and where they're at now. And that means it's no longer exhausting for me. And this is the difference that you notice when you shift from your stories not being all about you and the way you want to tell them, but actually being all about the audience. Because it's still using the same material. We just shape it slightly differently so it lands for the audience. So the audience get the ability to lean in and put themselves inside of your story. So I'm going to run you through in this very quick episode, just to reinforce episode number 20, there are 5 key rules when it comes to your stories and how we make sure that they are not about you. Rule number 1, which you touched on in episode 20, is there is no therapy from stage. Do not do your therapy from stage. Do not believe that speaking your truth while you are still in the midst of working it out and processing it will help you get further. It will actually just put you into the arena without defenses. So we don't speak in our world until we can speak on something with strength, power, and grace. We want to make sure that, unlike that client I just spoke about, where you get dragged down and into the mess, we want to make sure that you're actually able to deliver on your mission, which is to help others through your experience. So rule number 1, no therapy from stage. Always speak when we can speak about this thing with strength, power, and grace. Rule number 2 is understand negligence from the stage. And we spoke about that in the earlier episode. It is negligent to take people into dark places and not be able to pull them out of it. It is negligent to take people into trauma and dark places and not be able to share what you learned from it. It is negligent to speak in a way that has audiences trauma bonding with you or needing to get out of there because they are so ignited in their response. That is negligence. You can tell big, deep, dark stories, but you have to do it in a way that takes people in and takes people back out. If you don't and you don't understand, then that is purely negligence from the stage. Rule number 3 is shape to lend the messages. We don't have to tell all of our stories. We don't have to tell all of our stories to be authentic and truthful. But what we do have to do is we have to tell the parts of the stories that are both true and lend the message, that are both true and supported by Whirlpool, that are both true and allow people to step in with us, allow people to step into a place of trust and connection. We need to shape our stories to land the messages. Rule number 4, which I've said already, is always with strength, power, and grace. You know, some of the greatest speakers that we hear from, particularly in what I call the one-time recovery space, they're often called resilient speakers, but they're literally one-time recovery spaces. And these are things like, if I think about one of my closest friends, Martina Jewell, who's a professional speaker, she's a military speaker, she's a veteran, and she tells her story with so much power and so much strength and so much grace of something that was quite horrific to experience. We find this quite often. The people that actually have big lived experiences and one-time impact events that really capture our imagination, our attention, are the ones who are actually speaking with strength, power, and grace, even if they are speaking from within it. So it's so important to understand that this is how you actually have people feel safe with you and fall in love with you, and understand that they can step in and steal some of that strength, power, and grace if they need to at this point in their lives. And rule number 5 is I want you to remember the hero's journey, the truth about the hero's journey. You are not the hero, you are the guide when you take to a stage. If you still need to be the hero, if you still need to be the guru, you are not ready to take to the stage. Now, the hero's journey is the oldest and most powerful storytelling format in the world. What has been missed in the popularization of using the hero's journey is that the hero does go through battle, does go through shadows, does go through valleys. But the final stage of the hero's journey is that the hero comes back with the elixir to share. And the elixir is actually the wisdom and the insights and the knowing that they now have to share. And at that point, they shift from hero to guide. And that's the shift you have to have been able to make to actually take to the front of the room. And this is one of the most important parts. Yes, you will feel good. Yes, you will get adrenaline rush. Yes, you will, get all of your dopamine hits being the hero on stage. But to create transformation and impact and to make a difference in the world, you have to be the hero who has come back with the wisdom, the insights, and the knowing to share, and who is ready to step into being the guide.